I still remember the sound of that morning. It was quiet in a way only dawn can be quiet. A kind of soft, sleepy silence that wraps itself around the house like a thin blanket. You would think that silence is peaceful, but that morning it felt heavy. It felt like something was waiting for me. Something I did not want to see or read, or feel. I woke up earlier than usual that day. My bones felt restless, as they often do at my age, and my heart felt even more unsettled. So I got out of bed, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and walked slowly toward the kitchen to make tea. I did not expect anything unusual. My days had become almost predictable. A quiet breakfast, a quiet house, quiet thoughts. But when I reached the kitchen, my eyes stopped on something lying near the door. A folded letter, plain, simple, quiet. But it carried a weight I felt even before touching it. At first, I thought maybe it was a bill or some advertisement pushed through the gap under the door. But then I saw my name written on it. My full name. Not Amy, not Ma, not Grandma, not even the short name my neighbors call me. It was written in a handwriting I recognized very well. My daughter-in-law's handwriting. My hands froze. My heart felt like it was holding its breath. I stood there for a few long moments, just staring at the letter as if it were a strange animal that might jump at me. When someone writes a letter, instead of speaking to you face to face, it already means something is wrong. People only hide behind paper when their heart is tired or when their courage is weak. I knew this. I had lived long enough to understand it. But I still picked it up. My fingers shook a little, but I held it tightly. I carried it to the dining table, sat down on the chair I always sit on, and opened the letter slowly. The paper made a small sound, soft but sharp enough to cut through the quiet morning. I unfolded it, and I began to read. I will never forget the first line. I think it is time for you to go. My breath slipped out of my body. My eyes blurred. My heart felt as if someone pressed a hand against it and pushed. I read the sentence again, hoping I misunderstood it, but the words were the same. Quiet, simple, and painfully clear. I think it is time for you to go. She could have spoken to me. She could have called my name. She could have sat with me just once and shared how she felt. But instead, a letter. My daughter-in-law, the girl I welcomed into my home like a daughter, had written a letter telling me to leave. I kept reading. The words were polite, almost gentle. She said she was tired. She said the house felt crowded. She said she wanted space. She said she wanted her own life with her husband and children. She said I needed rest, peace, and maybe a little distance. Every line felt like a small stone falling into my chest. There was no anger in her letter, no insult, just decision. A quiet decision that was already made, without asking me, without even giving me a chance to speak. I folded the letter again, placed it on the table, and closed my eyes. For a few moments I felt nothing. Then everything at once. Hurt. A quiet, deep hurt. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the kind that sits in your throat and stops your breath. But here is the strange thing. I did not cry. I thought I would cry. Any mother, any grandmother would cry if someone she loved told her to leave. But my tears stayed inside. They did not fall. Instead, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. A calmness that comes when you realize something painful is not new. It has been growing quietly, slowly, day by day, and you finally see it fully. Maybe the hurt did not start with the letter. Maybe the letter was only the moment I finally opened my eyes to it. I looked around the kitchen, the same old fridge, the same little teacups, the same window with its thin curtains, the same chair that had held me for years, but suddenly everything felt different. Like the house was no longer mine. I sat there for a long time. I do not know how long. Dawn slowly turned into morning. Light filled the room gently, but it did not warm me. The letter lay quietly on the table, as if watching me. My daughter-in-law did not come downstairs. My son did not call my name. The children did not run to me for breakfast like they used to. The silence felt heavier now. It was then that I realized this letter was not written in a single night. It was written by many small moments. A sigh she gave when I asked a question. A quiet look she exchanged with my son when I repeated something. The way she closed the kitchen door a little faster than before. The way my teacup was moved aside. The way my chair at the dining table slowly shifted closer to the corner. None of these moments hurt me then, but together they became a letter, coming from her hands, landing at my door, ending in my heart. I placed my hand on the table and breathed deeply, trying to settle my thoughts. I knew I could not ignore this. I knew I had to face what was coming. But I did not know how for years this house had been my world, that I cooked here, that I raised my son here, that I held my grandchildren when they were babies, that I prayed in these rooms, that I waited for footsteps that no longer came, that I saved memories in every corner. And now, a letter was telling me it was time to go, that I could have gone upstairs right then and confronted her. I could have asked her why. I could have cried. I could have begged to stay. But something inside me stopped me. Sometimes silence says more than words. I leaned back in my chair and let myself remember. Remember the years, remember the love. Remember the small changes that slowly became distances. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was holding on to a place that no longer held me back. But knowing that does not make the pain smaller, that it only makes it quieter. That I picked up the letter again and touched the edges. Her handwriting was neat. She had taken her time writing it. Her tone was soft. She was not cruel. She was simply honest. Honesty can hurt, especially when it arrives alone at dawn. As I sat there, memories of how she entered my life began to drift toward me, like old photographs opening themselves gently. And so I began to remember the beginning, back when everything felt warm and hopeful, when I still believed I was needed. That is where my story truly begins. When I think back to the beginning, it almost feels like a different life, a life filled with noise, warmth, and movement. A life where I did not walk through the house alone or sit at the dining table waiting for sounds that never came. I want to take you back to those days, because they are the only way to understand how a quiet letter at dawn can feel like the final page of a very long story. My son Arif was my only child. He was born on a rainy night, the kind of night where the air is heavy and the windows shake a little. I remember holding him for the first time, so small, so warm, so helpless. I used to joke that I learned motherhood in that moment. In the space between one raindrop and the next, that he grew up quickly. Almost too quickly. He was always a gentle boy, quiet, responsible, and easy to love. He was the kind of child who held my hand even when he was old enough not to. The kind who kissed my forehead before leaving for school. The kind who tried to hide his tears when he broke a toy because he didn't want to worry me. When his father passed away, Arif was only 14. That was the first time I ever saw his shoulders fall. He didn't cry loudly. He just stood beside me like a small tree that suddenly learned how heavy the world could be. I remember placing my hand on his back and whispering, "It's all right, I am here." What I did not know at that moment was that someday I would repeat those same words to myself. It's all right, I am here. We survived those years together. Just the two of us. Breakfasts were simple. Dinners were quiet. But he always made me laugh in his soft way. And in that small house, we built a life that held both grief and comfort in the same hands. When he grew older, he became the kind of man any mother would be proud of. Hardworking, patient, responsible. He studied well, got a decent job, and started building a life that looked steady. But even steady lives changed. I still remember the day he told me he wanted to get married. He came home a little later than usual, and I knew something was on his mind. A mother always knows. He sat at the table, took a deep breath, and finally said, "Amy, I want to introduce you to someone." I smiled. My heart warmed. Every mother waits for that moment, the moment her child chooses someone to build a future with. A week later, she entered my life. Her name was Sana. She was young, polite, soft-spoken, and she carried herself with a simple grace. She smiled shyly when she met me, and I remember thinking, she is nervous. That means she cares. And she did care, at least then. I welcomed her with open arms. I prepared sweets. I arranged the cushions in the living room because I wanted everything to look good for her. I made tea the way I thought she might like it, light with a little extra milk. When she came into our home for the first time, she looked around slowly, taking in the small details. Her eyes softened when she saw the family photographs on the wall. She asked me small, respectful questions. She said, "Auntie" at first, but after a few weeks she started calling me Amy. The house felt full again. Alive again. Hopeful. A wedding followed, bright, crowded, and joyful. I remember sitting in the corner of the hall, watching the two of them smiling at each other under the lights, and thinking, my son is not alone now. He has his partner. His life is complete. When Sana moved into our home, I did everything I could to make her feel welcomed. I gave her the larger cupboard. I told her she could decorate the living room however she liked. I stepped back from the kitchen because I wanted her to feel like it was her home too. And she was good to me. In those early days, she truly was. She brought me tea without me asking. She asked for my recipes. She sat beside me and told me about her own childhood. We laughed together. We cooked together. We lived like a small, warm family. Sometimes I wonder if those days were truly as perfect as I remember them, or if my heart simply holds onto the warmest memories so the cold ones feel less sharp. But those early years were beautiful. There is no doubt in that. When she had her first child, my first grandchild, I felt like my life opened again. A new chapter. A new breath. A little girl, tiny, soft, and perfect. I held her in my arms and cried quietly. Sana smiled at me and said, "Amy, you love her so much." And I did. More than words. I helped with everything. Changing diapers. Late night crying, feeding time, bathing time, rocking her to sleep while singing old lullabies. Those were the happiest years of my old age. At a house filled with baby laughter and tiny footsteps. Warmth in every corner. But life rarely stays the same. Small changes began. Very small. So small I did not pay attention to them. It started with silence. Not the quiet silence of peace, but the silence of distance. Sana stopped sitting with me in the afternoons. She stayed in her room more often. She closed the kitchen door when she cooked. She spoke less and smiled less. At first, I thought she was simply tired. A young mother's life is not easy, but days turned into weeks, and the change did not pass. One evening, I walked into the living room and found her sitting alone on the sofa. She looked as if she had been crying, but when she saw me, she quickly wiped her tears and forced a small smile. "Are you okay, Beta?" I asked gently. She nodded. "Yes, Amy. Just a little tired." I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. I did not want to intrude. I told myself she needed space. I told myself she would come to me when she was ready, but she didn't. Over time, she stopped asking for my recipes. She stopped sitting with me during tea time. She stopped sharing small stories about her day. At first, I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I said something without realizing it. Maybe I forgot something important. Maybe I was becoming burdensome. But I brushed those thoughts aside. I told myself, no, Sana loves me. This is just a phase. The truth was, the phase kept growing. Quietly, slowly. Like a shadow stretching across the room. 1 inch at a time. Whenever I tried to help, she would say, "It's fine, Amy, I can do it." Whenever I offered to pick up the baby, she would say, "No, she just slept." Even when she didn't. Whenever I tried to sit with her, she would find a reason to stand up and leave. I told myself she was tired. I told myself she needed rest. I told myself she was adjusting to motherhood. But deep inside, a small ache started forming. Still, I stayed quiet. I did not want to be a burden. I did not want to disrupt her life. When the second child was born, a boy, I hoped things would return to how they once were. A new baby often brings people together. But instead, the distance grew. This time, Sana did not even ask me to hold him. She did everything herself, sometimes with her own mother's help, but rarely with mine. It hurt, yes. But again, I stayed quiet. My son Arif noticed some things too. He would say, "Amy, you're very quiet these days." And I would just smile and say, "I'm fine, Beta." I didn't want to place weight on his shoulders. He had his work, his responsibilities, his own family to look after. Why should he carry my hurt too? Sometimes I heard them whispering in their room. Low voices, fast conversations. Sometimes my name slipped out of their whispers. And that hurt more than anything. Not because they were talking about me, but because they felt the need to talk about me behind closed doors. One evening, Sana's mother visited. She walked around the house slowly, looking at everything, making small comments like, "Oh, this place feels too crowded. A young couple needs their own space. Joint families create tension, especially for new mothers. Your mother-in-law needs rest at her age. She should be living peacefully, not in a busy home." I heard every word. Every single word. I was sitting in the room next to them, folding clothes, and each voice floated through the half-closed door like tiny, sharp needles. Sana didn't disagree. She didn't defend me. She just nodded softly, as if those words matched her own thoughts. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow ticking of the old wall clock. Each tick felt heavier than the last. And yet, I still told myself, Sana is a good girl. She is just influenced. She is tired. She will come back to me. But hearts know the truth before minds do. Deep inside, I felt something slipping away. The turning point came quietly, like all painful things do. One day, while I was preparing tea, Sana walked into the kitchen. She didn't smile. She didn't look at me. She simply said, "Amy, can we talk later? I need to discuss something important." Her voice was calm. Too calm. My hands froze over the teapot. Something in her tone made my heart tighten. I nodded. "Of course, Beta." All day I tried not to think about it. But her voice stayed in my ears, and every time I remembered it, I felt a small fear stirring inside me. That evening, she did not come to talk. The next day, she didn't either. 2 days passed. 3 days. 4. And on the 5th morning, I found the letter that changed everything. But to understand why that letter cut so deeply, you have to understand how slowly, how quietly, the distance between us grew. A mother's heart can survive many things, but silence can break even the strongest hearts. I did not confront her. I did not confront my son. I simply folded the letter and began to remember the long road that led us here. And as the memories unfolded in my mind, I realized something. The letter was not the beginning of my hurt. It was only the first time the hurt had been written down. When I look back now, I often ask myself, could I have done something differently? But the truth is, conflicts in a family rarely arrive loudly. They slip in quietly, through small moments, misunderstood words, tired days, and unspoken feelings. What happened between Sana and me was not one big event. It was hundreds of tiny pieces of distance, forming one quiet wall between us. After the second child was born and her mother's comments echoed in my mind, I tried even harder to make everything peaceful. I tried to stay out of the way. I tried to help only when asked. I tried to speak less so I wouldn't say anything wrong. But sometimes silence becomes its own mistake. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room folding my grandson's clothes. The window was open and a soft breeze came in. I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked. The children were napping. The house felt calm. Then I heard Sana coming down the stairs. Her footsteps were light, but her pace was hurried. She was speaking on the phone. "Yes, I understand. Yes, I know. It's just hard sometimes," she said softly, trying not to be heard. I didn't move. I didn't want her to think I was listening. But her voice carried across the quiet room. "She doesn't mean harm, but it's tiring. Yes, I know she's old. I know, but small things bother me. I can't explain it to Arif." My chest tightened. I lowered my eyes to the tiny shirt in my hands, pretending to focus on the folds, but the words were already engraved in my heart. That meant me. Tiring, that too meant me. She listened silently for a few seconds, then said, "I can't live like this forever." Her voice broke slightly. She ended the call soon after and walked into the kitchen. I sat there, unable to move, feeling something inside me quietly fall apart. I told myself not to take it personally. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't really mean it. Maybe she was venting to a friend. But the ache began to grow, not because of what she said, but because she didn't say it to me. I wanted to walk to her, hold her hand and say, "Tell me what hurts you, Beta. I will fix it." But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the knowledge that she no longer wanted to share herself with me. The next few days were filled with small, silent moments that built more distance. One morning, I woke early and began preparing parathas for the children. They loved my parathas. I would always make them small, soft, and shaped like little hearts. It was a tiny gesture, but it made them happy. I was in the kitchen when Sana walked in. "Oh, you're cooking," she said, her voice flat. "Yes, Beta," I replied with a small smile. "I thought the children might like fresh parathas today." Her eyes flicked to the dough on the counter, then to the pan. She didn't smile back. "I already planned to make breakfast," she said. "Oh, I didn't know," I replied gently. "I can stop." She shook her head. "No, it's fine. Just next time please ask. I have things planned." There was no harshness in her voice, but there was no warmth either. A strange coldness sat between us. I stepped aside and said softly, "I'm sorry, Beta. I didn't mean to disturb your routine." She didn't answer. She simply turned away and washed a cup, her back facing me. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own kitchen. Another day, I was playing with the children in the living room. My granddaughter had drawn something she wanted to show me. A messy little picture with bright colors everywhere. I laughed, kissed her cheek, and praised her drawing. Just then, Sana walked in. "What happened?" she asked the child. "I drew a picture for Dottie," the little girl exclaimed happily. Sana smiled faintly, but I saw something else in her eyes, something tight, uncomfortable. Maybe she felt I was taking too important a place in the children's lives. Or maybe she felt overshadowed. I don't know. But when the children asked her to sit with us, she said, "Maybe later," and walked away. The children looked confused. I smiled and told them she was probably tired. But inside, I felt that familiar ache again. That evening, I heard her talking to Arif in the bedroom. "I don't know how to explain it," she said quietly. "It's just, I feel suffocated sometimes." There was a pause. She's not doing anything wrong, but I can't relax. I can't be myself. I feel watched. Watched? The word stung more than I expected. Was my presence truly so heavy? Arif replied with a sigh. She's my mother, Sana. This is her home. I know, she whispered. And I respect that. But I also want my own space. I want to run my home my way. I want to make decisions without someone always there. Her voice trembled slightly. I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. There it was, the truth she had been holding inside that I didn't hear Arif's response, because I walked away quietly, not able to take another word. That I went to my room, sat on the bed, and let the stillness surround me. That I looked at my hands, old, wrinkled, tired, and wondered if these hands, which once held, comforted and helped, had somehow become unwanted. The next day, something else happened, something small, but sharp. I made tea for everyone. As I always did. I placed the cups on the tray and carried them carefully to the living room. As I was serving, Sana gently said, Amy, please don't give the children tea. It has sugar. Oh, I said, surprised. I only put a little. They like to sip. I know, she interrupted. But I don't want them having sugar in the morning. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. I nodded. All right, Beta. I won't give it to them. I placed the cups back on the tray and walked away. But my granddaughter called out, Daddy, please, I want tea. I smiled at her, but before I could say anything, Sana said, No. You heard me. The little girl's face fell. I pretended not to notice. Inside, I felt a small crack. Not because of the tea. Not because of the sugar. But because I realized my place in the children's hearts was becoming a reason for Sana's discomfort. I didn't want that. I never wanted that. I loved those children more than I loved myself. The last thing I wanted was to create tension for them. So I stepped back even more. I stopped cooking unless asked. I stopped helping with the children unless invited. I stopped giving opinions. I stopped sitting in the living room for long periods. I stayed mostly in my room, reading old books or knitting. A mother's heart is strong, but a grandmother's heart, it breaks quietly. One afternoon, I was resting when I heard loud voices. Not angry, but tense. Arif and Sana were arguing. I am not saying she should leave, Arif said, his voice strained. I'm not saying that either, Sana replied, though I had already heard her say exactly that many times through her actions, if not her words. I'm just saying this house feels too small. I feel stressed. I can't live like this forever. I closed my eyes. The ache inside me grew heavier. This is her home too, Arif insisted. Yes, Sana said, but she's old. She needs peace. She needs a place where she can rest, where she doesn't feel responsible for everything. She feels guilty all the time. I know she does. That part was true. I felt guilty for breathing too loudly, for walking too softly, for existing too close. Arif sighed. What do you want me to do? Sana didn't answer. The silence spoke for her. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small tears that slipped down my cheeks because they had nowhere else to go. I prayed. I asked God to give me strength. I asked for my children to be happy, even if it meant I had to become the distance that gave them space. A few weeks later, something changed in the house. It felt subtle, like the air around us had shifted. Sana no longer tried to hide her discomfort. She began reorganizing the house slowly, moving things that were mine, packing away items I used, replacing small traditions with her own. One day, I found a box in the storage room with my old utensils inside. She had replaced them with new ones. Another day, I found the children's toys I had bought stored away in a cupboard. Then I noticed my chair, the one I had used for years, moved from the dining table to the corner of the living room. A small change, but a loud message. Sana didn't do any of this cruelly. She did it quietly, calmly, as if it were simply a natural step in the home's growth. But for me, it felt like watching roots being pulled out slowly, one by one. The last week before the letter arrived was the hardest. Sana barely met my eyes. My son looked tired and confused. The children sensed something was wrong, but they were too young to understand that I was living in a house filled with people. Yet I had never felt more alone. Every night, I lay awake thinking maybe I should leave. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to be the reason for their unhappiness. But I had nowhere else to go. My health was weak. My savings were small. My world was this home. Then dawn arrived with a quiet letter. And with it, the breaking point. The days that led to the turning point did not arrive suddenly. They came quietly, like soft footsteps in a silent room. Sometimes pain walks gently. It does not always knock loudly. It waits, watches, and then settles into the corners of your home until you finally notice it has taken over everything. I knew things were changing, but I kept thinking I still had time to fix them. I believed that if I stayed calm, if I kept loving everyone the way I always had, the storm would pass. I told myself that families go through seasons. I simply convinced myself this was just winter and spring would come. But I was wrong. It began on a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning where the light comes slowly and the air feels heavy even before noon. I was standing in the kitchen preparing tea. The quiet felt strange. Not peaceful, just strange. The kind of quiet that makes you look behind you, even when you know no one is there. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Slow, tired steps. It was my daughter-in-law. She walked into the kitchen with her arms folded and her eyes a little red. As if she had not slept well, she did not greet me. Instead, she asked, "Can we talk?" Whenever someone says those words, "Can we talk?" something inside the heart tightens. I nodded. Of course. She looked around as if making sure no one else was listening and then said softly, "I think we need some space in this house." Her words felt like a quiet knock on a door I had been ignoring. Space. I repeated gently. She sighed. Yes. There are too many misunderstandings. Too many small things becoming big things. I feel stressed. I feel watched. I feel like I cannot run my home freely. I listened. I kept my hands on the warm teapot as if holding on to something steady. "I never wanted to make you feel that way," I said. "I know," she answered. "But intentions don't always fix situations." And then she said the sentence that started changing everything. A sentence that felt simple but carried a deep meaning. "I think maybe you should take a break from here. A break from my own home, from the place I built brick by brick, from the walls that heard my son's first words, from the garden where I used to sit with my late husband. A break." I swallowed the sting in my throat. "For how long?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable. "I don't know. For a while." The conversation ended soon after. Not with anger. Not with shouting. Just silence. Quiet, heavy silence that stays longer than any loud argument ever could. That night I could not sleep. I sat by the window watching the streetlight outside. It flickered sometimes, as if it too couldn't decide whether to stay on or disappear. I kept wondering when everything had changed. When had my presence become a burden? When had my love become extra weight in someone else's life? The next few days were filled with small moments that felt heavier than they should have. My daughter-in-law spoke less. My son came home late, trying to avoid discussions. Even the house seemed distant. As if the walls had pulled back a little, no longer holding me with the same warmth. Then came the night that pushed things forward. It was a rainy evening. The kind of rain that lands softly, like whispers on the ground. My son entered my room without knocking, something he rarely did. "Amy," he said softly, "can we talk?" The words again. "Can we talk?" I nodded. "Sit, Beta." But he didn't sit. He kept standing, leaning against the doorframe. "I think maybe for a short time you should stay with Auntie Salma," he said. His voice was soft. Guilty. Hesitant. He wasn't trying to hurt me, he was trying to manage his household. Trying to keep peace between two people he loved. I could see the conflict in his eyes. A child torn between duty and comfort. "I understand," I said quietly. His eyes softened with relief, and that hurt me more than the suggestion itself. Relief. He was relieved I didn't argue, relieved that I didn't ask why. Relieved that his burden became lighter as mine grew heavier. After he left the room, I sat on the edge of my bed. I held my hands together. They did not shake, but my heart did. I whispered to myself, "This house is changing and I am standing still." A few days later, I began packing a small bag. Not much, just clothes, a few personal things, a Quran that belonged to my mother, and a photograph of my husband holding our son as a baby. That picture was my comfort. A reminder of a time when the world felt simple and the love inside these walls was unshakable. My daughter-in-law passed by the room when she saw the bag. You're really going?" she asked. I looked at her gently. "You wanted space." She lowered her eyes for a moment, then said quietly, "Thank you." That thank you felt like the softest cut. Not sharp, but deep. The night before I left, it rained again. The house felt colder. My room felt unfamiliar. Even the shadows looked different, as if I no longer belonged inside them. I lay awake until dawn. That was the morning. The morning everything changed. that I found the letter.it was just after far prayer. The sky was still pale. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floor. I stepped outside my room to get some water, and that's when I saw it. A small folded paper kept under the doorway, just lying there. Simple, quiet, innocent. But letters are never innocent. Not when they arrive quietly in the early morning. Not when they wait for you before the rest of the house wakes. I picked it up slowly. My name was written on it. My full name. In handwriting I recognized immediately. My daughter-in-law's handwriting. My heart tightened. I carried the letter back into my room. I sat down slowly, holding it in my hands. For a moment I just stared at it, as if the paper itself could tell me whether I was strong enough to open it. I finally unfolded it. Just one page, few lines, soft handwriting. Hard meaning. The first sentence hit me like cold wind. I am sorry if my words have ever hurt you, but I need a home that feels like mine. My eyes moved to the next line, even though a part of me wanted to stop reading. I respect you, but I also need a life where I can breathe without feeling judged. The third line, the one that truly broke something inside me. The one I was not prepared for. When you leave tomorrow, please understand I am not sending you away. I am choosing the peace I have not felt in years. Peace. She wanted peace, and somehow my presence had become the opposite of peace for her. The letter continued, small sentences, each one cutting softly. This house has felt tense. I feel like I cannot be myself. I hope you don't hate me. Please forgive me if you can. Forgive. She asked for forgiveness. Not because she wanted me to stay. Not because she regretted asking me to leave. But because she needed to clear her heart before I walked out the door. I held the letter for a long time. Then, without meaning to, I whispered, I forgive you. And I did. Not because it was easy, not because the pain was small, but because holding resentment would only make the wound grow. The sun slowly began to rise outside my window. Soft golden light entered the room. The same room where I had spent so many years caring for my family. I looked around, at the walls, at the bed, at the small picture frame on my table. Everything felt different now. Not worse. Not better. Just different, like a chapter quietly closing itself. I folded the letter again and placed it inside the pocket of my bag. Not to carry the pain, but to carry the truth. I stood up. I breathed. I held the handle of my small suitcase, and that was the moment, the exact moment, when I realized the turning point was not the letter, it was me, because for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected, a small, quiet sense of acceptance. Not defeat, not bitterness, just acceptance. Sometimes life does not give us the ending we wanted, but it gives us the strength to walk through the ending we receive. And so, with a soft heart and steady steps, I walked toward the door, toward whatever waited next, toward the part of the story I had never imagined I would have to live. The morning I left my home felt strangely peaceful, not because the pain had vanished, and not because I felt ready. It was peaceful in that quiet way right before someone cries. The air holds still, the heart holds still, and for a moment, the world feels like it has stopped breathing with you. I stood in the doorway with my small bag. The same doorway where my husband once stood every morning before work, adjusting his tie. The same doorway where my son ran out as a boy, his school bag too big for his tiny shoulders. So many memories lived in that wooden frame. And yet somehow in that moment I felt like a guest standing at the entrance of my own story. My son came down the stairs slowly. He tried to smile. It was the kind of smile that looks strong from far away but breaks when you stand close enough. Amy, he whispered. Are you sure you'll be okay? I touched his face gently. I will be fine. I knew he needed to hear it, and sometimes, mothers say things not because they are true, but because their children need to believe them. My daughter-in-law stood a step behind him, her hands were together, her eyes lowered. She looked worried, guilty, confused. I could tell she had not slept either. When our eyes met, she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. So I gave her a small nod, not a nod of blame. Just a nod that said, I understand. And with that, I stepped out of the house. The door closed behind me softly, almost respectfully, and that soft sound felt heavier than a storm. My friend Salma lived only 20 minutes away. She welcomed me with warm arms and a worried look. You can stay as long as you want, she said. I'm here. We will talk. We will cook together. We will pass this time gently. Her kindness felt like a blanket on a cold night. Her home was quiet, neat, Simple. A small house with soft colors and a kitchen that always smelled of tea and lemon. She gave me a room near the window, where sunlight entered easily. But the first night there, sleep did not come. I kept turning the letter over in my hands, not reading it, just holding it. Like a small weight that I had carried for so long that my fingers had memorized its shape. I wondered if leaving the house had really created the peace my daughter-in-law asked for. And I wondered if my son was sleeping or lying awake like me. I whispered to myself, did I do the right thing by staying silent? Did I leave too quietly? Did I make it easier for them? Or harder for myself? But I also knew something important. Sometimes letting go is the only way to keep love alive. Days passed softly. Salma and I cooked together. We sat outside during sunset. We prayed. We talked about old memories, about our children when they were little, about our husbands. There were still moments when sadness washed over me suddenly, like when I saw a mother walking with her grown son, or when I heard a woman calling Amy from another street. But the pain was no longer sharp. It became gentle. It became something I could hold without breaking. Each night, I would sit near the window in my new room and whisper the same words. Ya Allah, soften my heart. Ya Allah, soften their hearts, and bring peace to all of us. I did not pray to return home. I only prayed for peace. Maybe that is what age teaches you. That peace is more precious than pride. One evening, about 2 weeks after I left, there was a knock on the door. A soft knock, the kind that is not sure it should be knocking at all. I opened the door, and there stood my son. He looked tired, not physically tired, emotionally tired, like someone carrying a decision that felt too heavy. Amy, he whispered, almost breathless. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around as if afraid I might disappear if he blinked. Salma made tea for us and then quietly left the room, giving us space. My son sat on the sofa. He didn't speak for a long time. He kept rubbing his hands together, something he did as a child whenever he felt guilty. Finally, he said, "The house feels empty without you." A simple sentence, but it sank into the quiet of the room like a stone into deep water. I didn't want you to leave, he continued. And I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't want to choose between you and her. I felt pulled in two directions. I nodded gently. I understand. He looked up surprised. You do? Yes, I said. You're a husband now, and still my son. It's not easy to balance both. He took a deep breath and then said something I never expected. She cried after you left. She said she didn't think you would really go. She said she didn't know how to speak to you anymore without feeling judged. I was quiet. Sometimes silence is an answer. Sometimes silence is a shelter. My son leaned forward. Amy, she is pregnant. My breath paused for a moment. Pregnant at a new life, a new beginning, a new chapter one was not part of yet. He continued softly. She didn't want to tell you in that tense environment. She wanted to tell you when things were calmer. But then everything kept getting worse, and she felt overwhelmed. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from pain, but from the sudden rush of emotion, joy, sadness, relief, confusion. I'm going to be a grandmother, I whispered at my son's eyes softened. Yes, Amy. Then his voice broke slightly. And I want my child to know you. I want your warmth in the house. I want your prayers, your stories, your presence. I don't want my child to grow up feeling distance in the family. My eyes filled with tears, but they were not painful tears. They were the kind that washed the heart. He reached into his pocket and took out a small envelope. My heart stopped for a second. A letter. He placed it in my hands. It's from her, he said. I looked at him, then slowly opened it. Her handwriting again, soft, small, emotional. Amy, I am sorry I didn't ask you to leave because I didn't want you. I asked because I didn't know how to express my fears. I am going to be a mother soon. And I don't want my child to see me lose myself. I felt pressured, emotional, confused. Please forgive me. Please come home when you feel ready. I need you more than I can say. My hands trembled slightly. Not from anger, but from grace, from love, from the unexpected softness of the words. My son looked at me with hopeful eyes. Amy, will you come home? I wiped my tears gently. I will come, I said. But not today. He looked confused for a moment, and then I added softly, I want the first step to be peaceful. I want to return not because I am needed, but because our hearts are ready. He nodded slowly, and somehow that moment, that gentle, quiet decision, brought more peace to both of us than anything else could have. A few days later, I finally gathered my things, the letter from Dawn, the letter from that evening, both tucked carefully into my bag. I left Salma's house with a grateful heart. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Go with a soft heart, come back with a full one." My son came to pick me up. The car ride was silent but not heavy, just calm. When we reached home, I paused at the gate. The same gate I had walked out of with a small bag and a quiet goodbye. This time, I walked in with peace. My daughter-in-law was standing inside the living room. Her hands were shaking slightly, her eyes full of tears. She took one small step toward me. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I forgive you," I replied. She covered her face and cried softly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The way a heart cries when it finally releases everything it held inside. I held her hands gently. No lectures, no reminders, no blame. Just a mother holding another woman who was learning how to become a mother herself. And in that simple moment, the entire house felt lighter. The walls felt warmer. The air felt softer. The silence felt kinder. Sometimes healing arrives not as a grand gesture, but as a small apology, a soft smile, a quiet understanding. Weeks passed. My daughter-in-law's pregnancy progressed gently. She became softer, more open, more trusting. We cooked together again. We talked again. Sometimes we sat in silence together, and even that silence felt peaceful. The house became home again. Not because everything returned to how it used to be, but because we all changed a little. She learned how to express her fears. I learned how to step back without feeling forgotten. My son learned how to balance his love. And the letter, the one that once broke my heart, became a reminder of how fragile people can be when they feel overwhelmed. The day her baby was born, a small, healthy girl with tiny fingers and a quiet face, I held her in my arms and felt something inside me settled. A piece of my heart that had been bruised finally felt whole again. My daughter-in-law looked at me with tired, grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For staying, for forgiving me, for being here." I kissed her forehead. "Families don't break by mistakes," I said softly. "They break when we stop trying. And they heal when one person chooses softness over pride." She smiled through her tears, and as I held my granddaughter close, with her warm little heartbeat resting against mine, I realized something simple and beautiful. Sometimes the thing that breaks your heart 'tis the very thing that teaches your heart how to love more gently. And that morning letter, the one that shattered me, also opened a door to a new beginning I never imagined I would get.